If you appreciate the power of battlefield control in your D&D characters, or if you just really like playing full casters at your table, then I think you're going to particularly enjoy today's video. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, each week we take a deep dive into character builds for our favorite role-playing games. Usually that means Dungeons & Dragons. We theorycraft about them, we often crunch numbers about them, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a certain character, but just to explore one potential way to build something that is both fun and powerful to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for your role-playing games almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. So thank you for watching. My name is Colby. I usually put out one build a week on Tuesdays, so please, if you haven't yet, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notifications bell so that you don't miss an episode. Right, so it has been a few weeks since I've done a Dungeon Dudes inspired build. For those who don't know, Kelly and Monty, the Dungeon Dudes, check them out right over here. Those gurus of all things Dungeons & Dragons have been going through their multi-class tier rankings over the last few months, and I have been doing a build for each main class that's inspired by a particular combo they discuss, right? More often than not, I've been trying to do a build with a combo that they say doesn't really work all that well, and then trying to find an exception to the rule. Today, we are going to do the Sorcerer. Now, as I was listening to their Sorcerer video, I was like, ooh, this would be cool. Oh, that would work great. Hey, this would be fun. And then I get to the very end of the video as they were talking about the Wizard multi-classed with the Sorcerer, which both Kelly and Monty gave a D rank to, by the way. And Kelly said this.
I feel like we haven't called Colby out in this video to do anything. So I don't know, Colby, try building a Sorcerer with a few levels of Wizard and make it good.
For reals? The Wizard Sorcerer? Kelly, you're killing me. But you know what? The gauntlet has been thrown down, and I am not backing away. Sorcerer Wizard? Okay, we've got this. So a few weeks ago in one of my BG3 build videos, this one actually, I did a Control Freak build. It was based largely on the Control Freak D&D build that I did a couple of years ago that I have often claimed to be my most powerful character build that I've ever done, despite the fact that the build does 0 damage. In that BG3 video, I made the character a wizard. My argument for doing so was that wizards have access to the biggest spell list in the game, and as such, made the best controllers. But while I was coming up with that character, I spent a lot of time looking at the Sorcerer as an alternative controller, and the more I looked at it, the less sure of myself I became that wizard actually was the best controller in the game. I mean, sorcerers get access to most of the best control spells, and better yet, get meta magic, which just really opens up the door to what kinds of things you can do in a fight to control the battlefield. And here's the dirty little secret about that Control Freak build that I did back in the day. It's really boring to play. I know because I tried it for a one-shot, and while it was incredibly powerful, arguably too powerful, it was super boring. I'd concentrate on a strong control spell and then just hypnotize an additional enemy and then just sit there for my turn every round while my companions got to do all of the fun killing the bad guys stuff. But what if you could both lock down multiple enemies and still do something fun and powerful with your bonus action once in a while? What if you could throw out a potent single target control spell onto 2 enemies instead of just 1? This is where the Sorcerer starts to potentially outshine the Wizard as a controller, right? But of course, there is still the matter of wizards having access to important spells that sorcerers don't have access to. Except, unlike in BG3, in D&D, we have access to the Clockwork Soul subclass, among others, and that is the nail in the coffin that's going to seal the deal as sorcerers, at least in D&D, in my opinion, being even better controllers than wizards, especially when you can combine the two of them together. And so, I proudly present D&D build number 146, the Clockwork controller. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he created for this character concept. He does this every week. He's such a great artist. If you'd be interested in following him to see the other stuff that he does, or to potentially reach out to him to try and commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party potentially, I will put links in the video description as always on how to do so. Thanks, Randall. But before we jump into the build, I'm super excited to tell you guys about a new anthology of 5e compatible horror adventures called Librus Nocturnum by my friends over at Lunch Break Heroes, as they are the sponsor for the video this week. Librus Nocturnum means Book of Night in Latin. At the time of this video's release, Lunch Break Heroes just launched their Kickstarter for this book a couple of days ago, and they need your support to help them hit their funding and stretch goals. Now, the object of the book is to provide D&D horror enthusiasts, just in time for Halloween, with high-quality adventures that their entire table will enjoy, which you can run individually or together in a long-running campaign. Similar, I think, to other recent releases by Wizards of the Coast like Wild Beyond the Witchlight or Candlekeep Mysteries, right? The world of Librus Nocturnum is a land beset by evil, where nightmares roam free. Your characters are among a handful who dare brave the darkness. The question is, will they push back the night or join the countless others who have been consumed by evil? In each adventure, Librus Nocturnum tackles a new facet of the horror genre, from gothic horror to body horror to cosmic horror and more. The adventures held within will always give dungeon masters something new, fresh, and terrifying to torment and delight their players with. Inside this book, you will find over 200 pages filled with 13 horror adventures made for characters levels 1 through 12, where you will attempt to survive a zombie apocalypse, solve bloody mysteries, and break dark curses. There are 13 new settlements, towns, and cities to explore, over 30 new creatures and NPC stat blocks, beautiful custom art by a variety of talented artists. It's fantastic, right? And highly detailed maps by Andy D'Amato, aka DM Andy. Also, as with all great Kickstarters, there are fantastic goodies available to those who back it now. Things like a custom dice set, Foundry VTT modules for the campaigns themselves, and more, with stretch goals that will lead to additional adventures, art prints, and special editions of the book. So if you love third-party content creators and or horror settings in your role-playing games, do yourself a favor and go back this project. You will not regret it. You've only got until Halloween, October 31st. That's when the Kickstarter ends, so don't delay. I'm going to put a link in the video description on how to get to that Kickstarter. I would appreciate it if you would use that link so that they know I sent you. Huge thanks to everyone at Lunch Break Heroes. Good luck on hitting those goals. I cannot wait to see the finished product here. All right. Let's jump into the build. At level 1, for our starting class, yes, we are going to be starting out as a sorcerer here. Not only is that kind of the rules that Kelly and Monty set up when they're doing their tier rankings for multi-classing with the classes. You know, you got to start off as and then be primarily that class, right? Not that I haven't strayed from those rules myself on occasion. But also, for this build, sorcerers get Constitution saving throw proficiency, unique among full casters, and that is just so important for those of us who plan on concentrating on spells all of the time, helping us hold on to that concentration a lot more easily. As for our race, yeah, we're going back to Old Faithful here. We're going custom lineage. We're going to be so very super mad on this character, multiple ability score dependent, but charisma will be more important than any other stat, of course. And the only way to start out at level 1 with an 18 in one ability score, assuming we're going point by and not rolling and getting lucky, right, is by going custom lineage because it gives us a free feat. And the feat that we will be taking is super powerful for this character, and we would 100% want it anyway. I'm talking about Fey Touched, which is, the feat that we would take as the free feat here at level 1. This is one of my very favorite feats in all of D&D. I sorely miss it in BG3, as it gives us, first up, a +1 to a mental ability score of our choice. We'll take charisma, of course, but then it also gives us the Misty Step spell for free, incredibly. That's a 2nd level spell. And then another 1st level spell of our choice, so long as it comes from the enchantment or divination schools of magic. And for this build, we are going to be taking Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which isn't otherwise available to sorcerers, and is such a great control spell. It both knocks an enemy prone and incapacitates them with gut-busting laughter if they fail their wisdom save against it. They do get to make a save to recover at the end of each turn, and when they take damage as well, but still, it's a very strong control spell for a level 1 spell. Now, Yes, it's true that we could grab this spell when we dip into Wizard later, but it's important to take it with this feat instead because doing so lets us use our Charisma for the spellcasting modifier, and since our Intelligence isn't going to be fantastic, it makes it a much more viable of a control option for us. As for our ability scores, yes, I assume we go point by as always and recommend that we take a 15 in Charisma plus 2 from our racial and plus 1 from the feat, right, to give us an 18, then a 14 Constitution, a 14 Intelligence, and only then a 12 Dexterity. And yeah, this is going to make this character fairly squishy. We have no armor proficiencies, meaning the best that we'll be able to do for our armor class really is Mage Armor plus all of 1 from our Dexterity for a 14 AC. Yikes. Now, you might be totally okay with this. I kind of am, honestly. I like living dangerously and keeping like potential weaknesses built into my characters. It makes them a little more interesting and fun to play, I think. But for the sake of optimization, I would strongly encourage you to consider starting with, yes, a single level of fighter. You'd get to keep that sweet Constitution saving throw proficiency that sorcerers get, right? But then pick up both heavy armor and shield proficiency as well. It will likely make your life a whole lot easier. And sure, if you have one level of fighter, it is that much easier to just grab a second level of fighter for action surge, which is always fantastic and wonderful. I'm not, however, going to go that route on this build. I'm just going to hope that locking down enemies on the battlefield will allow my companions to handle everything else and keep the bad guys from getting to me as best they can. If you don't have that same level of faith in your companions, or like if you think your DM is going to have their enemies just constantly be trying to get to you at all costs, or if you just want to err on the side of caution, yeah, go ahead, grab a level of fighter here. Although, yes, that will mean that you'll have to increase your dexterity to at least a 13 in order to multi-class with fighter, right? So your constitution or intelligence will then suffer. Another reason to not go that route. As for starting equipment here, I'm just going to say standard fare. There's nothing special here. We don't have any specific armor or weapon requirements, so just get what you usually get. Now, at level 1, sorcerers get their subclass, their sorceress origin, and I've already mentioned this, yes, we are going with Clockwork Soul. I've only ever used this subclass one other time in a D&D build before, the Clockwork Tank from a while back, which is a shame because I actually do think that it's one of the strongest sorcerer subclasses in the game. So yes, when we first meet our champion, they are fascinated and perhaps even empowered by the cosmic forces of order and efficiency. You might have an ancestor who was a Modron, or is from Mechanus, or perhaps was like a world-class artificer. I think this character in particular, however, is especially interested in the hypnotic aspects of Clockwork. Maybe they have like a magical metronome, right? Or a swaying pocket watch that will help them lull people into a trance or a stupor. Regardless, as a Clockwork Soul, we get a couple of great features. First up, we get Restore Balance, which tells us that proficiency bonus times per day. We can use our reaction to prevent a roll from either benefiting from advantage or suffering from disadvantage, so long as we can see the creature making the roll and they are within 60 feet of us. Can be a nice way to help bolster your team or hinder your enemies, which I guess technically is also bolstering your team. Anyway, the more important feature here, and the main reason we chose Clockwork Soul as our subclass actually, is the Clockwork Magic feature. This gives us not only a really nice list of additional spells that we get to learn for free, but also tells us that when we gain a sorcerer level, we can replace one of those free spells with another spell of the same level from the sorcerer, warlock, or wizard spell list, so long as it's from the abjuration or transmutation school of magic. This really expands the spells that we're going to have access to, and that is fantastic. As for which spells we should learn at level 1 here, Clockwork Souls then get Alarm and Protection from Good and Evil for free. These spells aren't terrible, but I would probably place at least Alarm with Shield, I think. Even though we can already learn Shield as a sorcerer spell, it will free up a slot for us to learn another better spell than Alarm. Shield is, of course, one of the best defensive spells in the game, letting us use our reaction to raise our armor class by 5 until our next turn when we get hit, which really helps that 14 AC not hurt quite so bad. In addition, I would say we ought to grab Absorb Elements to give ourselves on-demand elemental damage resistance, Mage Armor of course, and yeah, Silvery Barbs if you can brave the Silvery Barbs mob, to use your reaction to force an enemy who succeeds at an attack, a save, or ability check to re-roll and hopefully fail. You then get to give advantage to yourself or an ally on your next attack, save, or ability check made within the next minute. This is really going to come in handy for those of us looking to severely punish enemies who fail their saving throws, right? The other spell I really want to emphasize though here is Mind Sliver. This cantrip is going to be fantastic for us. It's an action to cast, and it forces an enemy to make an intelligence save, one of the best saves for us to be targeting, by the way, or they take some damage and then have to subtract a d4 from their next saving throw made before the end of our next turn. We're going to get some good mileage out of this spell, I think, especially later on. At level 2, we get Font of Magic, which means we get our sorcery points starting now, 1 per sorcerer level, and then we're told that we can use these sorcery points to create more spell slots or can convert spell slots into more sorcery points. Both of those things are done with a bonus action, and that's really all we can do with sorcery points for now. But at level 3, we get meta magic. And meta magic is really kind of the biggest reason why I think ultimately control sorcerers have an edge over control wizards, especially if you can still get access to some outlier powerful control spells not usually available to sorcerers, which we have done and will be doing. So yes, we get to choose 2 meta magic options here to spend sorcery points on in order to enhance our spells in a variety of awesome ways. The 2 that I would suggest here would be Quicken Spell, of course, my favorite, which allows us for 2 sorcery points to cast a spell as a bonus action instead of an action. And then I think I'd probably be getting Twin Spell here. This lets us spend a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level, so it ain't cheap, to have the spell affect 2 targets instead of just 1. This means we could, say, twin Tasha's Hideous Laughter, for example, to lay down some really serious multi-target control as early as level 3 now, which is nice since a spell like Sleep kind of loses its potency right about now. I guess I should have mentioned at level 1 you ought to take Sleep, but it really isn't very good past level 2 or so. Now, you could alternatively take Heightened Spell here instead of Twin Spell. This lets us force an enemy to have disadvantage on their saving throw against one of our spells, right? But it's super expensive at 3 sorcery points, and for that reason, I think it's probably better taken as an option later on in our career when we've got more points to play around with. As for the second level spells we get here at Sorcerer 3, there are a ton that I would love to have. Clockwork Souls get Aid and Lesser Restoration for free, both incredible support spells that I'm pretty much taking on every cleric, right? Aid in particular. But if someone in your party already has those bases covered, feel free to swap them out, though there aren't a ton of second level abjuration or transmutation spells that I feel like are must-haves. As for the other spells to grab, you're going to want to consider Hold Person to paralyze a humanoid potentially, which is super punishing. Web is of course one of the best early game control spells, potentially restraining multiple enemies. Suggestion is great, likely causing an enemy to just straight up leave the battlefield to go save their endangered friends or family or whatever else you suggest to them, right? And actually would be a great candidate for Twin Spell. I actually really like the idea of Rhymes Binding Ice here. It's a newish spell from the Fizzbands book. It shoots ice in a 30-foot cone, not bad, and every creature who fails their save, Constitution, unfortunately, takes damage and has their move speed reduced to 0 for a minute, unless another creature uses their action to break them out of the ice. That's really pretty strong. Finally, Tasha's Mind Whip is worth considering, as it forces, again, an intelligence save, or an enemy takes damage and then on their next turn has to choose between moving, taking an action, or a bonus action, and only one of those 3 things. And they don't get reactions. It's sort of a poor man's slow spell with a damage rider. Not a bad option for Twin Spell either. And, best of all, doesn't require a concentration. At level 4, we get our first ability score increase or feat, and we have got to bump Charisma, I think. We cap it here at 20, making our enemies much more likely to fail their saves against our powerful control spells. most importantly. But at level 5, we reached the promised land that is 3rd level spells, which are, yes, among the best in the game. Clockwork souls get Dispel Magic and Protection from Energy for free. Not bad. But when it comes to control spells, there are really 3 standout options here. Hypnotic Pattern forces enemies in a 30-foot cube to make a save or be charmed and incapacitated until they take damage, or an ally uses their action to snap them out of it. Fear forces enemies in a 30-foot cone to make a save or drop what they're holding and become frightened, also forcing them to use the dash action on their turn to run as far away from you as they can by the safest route possible for 1 minute, or until they lose sight of you. Fear is situationally even better than Hypnotic Pattern, as the enemies don't get to save again at the end of their turn, like with Hypnotic Pattern or when they take damage. So as long as there aren't any like nearby corners to run around or anything, I do think it's probably the better option most of the time. But slow might be best of all, especially if the enemy is immune to charmed or frightened, as you tend to get a lot more of as you get higher level. It lets you force 6 enemies to make a save, and you get to pick which ones they are, right? So you don't have to worry about potentially catching your allies in the AoE. And if those enemies fail, they have their move speed cut in half, their AC and dexterity saves dropped by 2, they're prevented from taking reactions, and they then, yes, have to choose between an action or a bonus action on their turn, but not both. And regardless, they can't make more than 1 attack per turn, even if they have extra attack, multi-attack, and it can even potentially slow down spellcasting for an entire minute. Now, they do get to save against slow again at the end of each turn, but it's still just an incredibly potent debuff that is going to do wonders for your entire party when you use it. It strikes me too that it might also be a little less frustrating for your DM, because even though you've severely crippled a lot of their monsters, you haven't just completely shut them down and locked them down, which might ultimately cause them to be a little bit nicer to you than they otherwise would, right? Best of all, for this build, slow happens to be a transmutation spell, so I probably would swap it for protection from energy, hold on to Dispel Magic, but that way we can learn more of those 3rd level spells that we want to learn. But at level 6, with 3rd level spells under our belts and a good chunk of sorcery points too, I think it's time to take a detour away from Sorcerer. Character arc and story-wise, I see this multi-class dip as little more than our characters' growing interest in hypnotism, maybe especially now that they've learned Hypnotic Pattern, right? They've begun to really tap into how potent a controller they can be with the right knowledge and tools, and they are thrilled to be able to better order the battlefield as they see fit. As such, they are going to turn their attention away for a time to a more rigorous study of how this power works exactly, and what they can do to enhance their capabilities with it. Whatever your reasons, yes, we are taking wizard levels now. As such then, at Wizard 1 we get Arcane Recovery, which lets us, once per day after a short rest, recover spent spell slots equal to half our wizard level rounded up. So just a single level spell slot for now. That is still appreciated though, and considering how flexible we can be with our sorcery points and spell slots, getting another slot just means increased flexibility, potentially more sorcery points, and we love that. As for the spells that we get at Wizard 1, I'm just going to say, keep in mind that as a wizard, our spells are potentially affected by our intelligence modifier, which is still only a +2, right? So I would plan on taking spells here that just work. Stuff like Shield, Absorb Elements, Silvery Barbs. Then, as we gain levels in Sorcerer later on, we can swap those out that we learned at Sorcerer level 1, right? From our known Sorcerer spells to just continue increasing our spell repertoire. Right, so for those new to the channel, usually at levels 6, 9, 13, and 17, I do a damage report where I figure out how much damage we can do to enemies at this level based on their armor class and or saving throw, or if it's a tank, how much damage they would take, right? When I do support builds, however, we're not really focused on either dealing or taking damage, so I just call it a tactics report, where we review what combat is probably going to look like for us at this level, what options we have, right? Needless to say, we are a first-rate controller. We can throw down the best control spells in the game right now with Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, and Slow, and have plenty of uses for those lower-level spell slots as well in the form of Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Web, etc. We've even got some decent damage and support options if we want them. There's no reason why you couldn't say, slow a bunch of enemies on round 1, then fireball the lot of them on round 2, enjoying their reduced dexterity saving throw from slow to help you do more damage to all of them. And with things like Twin Spell and Quicken Spell, we'll potentially be able to affect more targets and or control more targets with our bonus action, and then get a little cantrip out there with our action, like a Mind Sliver or a Firebolt, to both throw down some decent control and potentially do some damage all in the same round. We're in a great place at the moment, but we're really going to hit our stride next level, because at level 7 we would be a wizard 2, and that means we get our subclass. And in case you hadn't guessed yet, yes, we are going with enchantment, of course. The main reason for doing that is because of the hypnotic gaze feature that enchanters get at this level, which tells us that as an action we can force an enemy who can either see or hear us to make a wisdom save or be charmed by us until the end of our next turn. And this is way better than it is in Baldur's Gate 3, because we can essentially do it as often as we want, just not to the same target more than once per day, if they succeed on their save against it, right? Now, when they are charmed by us, their speed drops to 0 and they are incapacitated. So it's very similar to what happens with Hypnotic Pattern. The main differences, though, are that this doesn't require a concentration, and that the enemy cannot be snapped out of it by an ally, though it does end if they take damage or if we move more than 5 feet away from them. The best part is that once they fail that initial saving throw, we can maintain the effect every single round by just using our action to do so, and at that point they don't get to save against it. It just automatically works. Now, the big drawback to all of this, of course, is that Hypnotic Gaze requires us to use our action every single round, meaning that we're potentially not really doing that much on our turn, which is why coupling this with Sorcerer is so compelling, I think, thanks largely to Quicken Spell. Now, an important thing to remember is that since this is a wizard feature, the DC that the enemies are saving against is based on our intelligence, and that is a bit of a bummer. I would do everything in my power to try and find a headband of intellect on this character by level 7. But even if we can't find one, here's the good news. With Quicken Spell, we can open up on this enemy by quickening Mind Spike, which is a sorcerer spell and based on our charisma, to do a little damage and then lower their next saving throw by a d4, right? At that point, we could use our action to Hypnotic Gaze them, greatly increasing the likelihood of them failing despite our 14 intelligence. And then once they fail, we shouldn't have to worry about needing them to fail again versus our relatively mediocre DC, right? We're not using our concentration yet, so on round 2, we could then throw out a slow or a fear or whatever with another Quicken Spell, and then just keep our main target locked down with our action. It just really opens up the options for what you can do on your turn and keeps the gameplay on this build a lot more interesting, I think, while still being incredibly powerful. And I love that. And while, sure, Quicken Spell is relatively expensive at 2 sorcery points, keep in mind that we can convert spell slots into more points if we want, and Arcane Recovery will help us stretch that just a little bit further than usual too. Now that we've mastered the art of hypnosis though, I think at level 8 it's time to go back to Sorcerer, so we'd be a Sorcerer 6. We want those higher level spells and more sorcery points primarily. And thus, at this level as a Clockwork Soul, that means we get Bastion of Law. This lets us spend an action and 1 to 5 sorcery points to create a magic ward that absorbs damage for either us or an ally within 30 feet. For every sorcery point we spend, we get a d8. And then, until your next long rest, or we use the ability again, when the warded person takes damage, they can roll any number from that pool of d8s and reduce the damage by that amount. It's a nice little defensive or support feature for us, though it is pretty expensive, so I probably avoid using it too often, personally. At level 9, we would be a Sorcerer 7, and that means 4th level spells. Clockwork Souls get Freedom of Movement and Summon Construct for free, and while both of those are decent spells, I'd probably look to replace them with Banishment, first up, which is an amazing single target control spell, shunting an enemy off to another plane for a minute, or if they're native to another plane, just sending them home permanently. And then with Polymorph as well, which is a transmutation spell, because yeah, turning our enemy into a goldfish until you're ready to deal with them is always some fantastic control. Other great control options at this level would be Dominate Beast, to just take direct control of a beast if you're fighting one. And then I'm a big fan of Ralathim's Psychic Lance. It doesn't require concentration, takes an action to cast, and lets you do a decent amount of damage, 7d6, to a single enemy, plus incapacitates them for a single round if they fail their intelligence save against it. They don't wake up if they take damage, so it's a great way to help your allies really blow up a single enemy quickly while also forcing them to lose a turn, right? Great spell. Alright, time for our level 9 tactics report. Since last check, a lot has actually changed for us. Kind of our whole MO, as now we're primarily going to be quickening spells with our bonus action and hypnotic gazing a single target with our action. The variety of ways that we can control have also greatly increased thanks to 4th level spells, and it's only going to get better from here. So, at level 10, we would be a Sorcerer 8, and that means we get another ability score increase or feat. I think if it were me, I'd probably bump Intelligence here. Part of me really wants to go with Constitution for more health and better concentration checks primarily, but I guess I've kind of already committed to being squishy and hoping my allies will largely keep me safe here, so I'm going to double down on the control aspect of this build and just try to help my hypnotic gaze stick more reliably. At level 11, we would be a Sorcerer 9, and that means 5th level spells. And this actually brings us to the main reason that I wanted to go Clockwork Soul in the first place, because Clockwork Soul sorcerers get Greater Restoration for free here, which is a really fantastic support spell to get your allies out of just about every bad condition or curse that they might be placed under. But then, alright, look, if I were to ask you to list your top 3 control spells in D&D 5e, by show of hands, how many of you would put Wall of Force on that list? Sure, it might not be quite as powerful as Mass Suggestion or Force Cage, but it's a 5th level spell, right? Which means that almost all campaigns are going to get to the point where it's actually available. And it is just so good. But sorcerers don't get the spell, unless you're a Clockwork Soul. So hooray for us, because now we can, with our concentration, just throw down an invisible force field to trap our enemies behind. And unless they can teleport or have the Disintegrate spell, they're just going to be trapped there doing nothing until we are good and ready to deal with them. No saving throw, they're just in jail. It is so good, and I am so happy that we get to have our metamagic cake and eat it too, thanks to Clockwork Magic. Other great spells to look for here, though, include Dominate Person, so now you can more than just hold humanoids, but directly control them, potentially. Hold Monster, so you can paralyze anything but undead. I'll mention Telekinesis as a potential Clockwork Magic target to replace Greater Restoration, especially if someone else in your party has that spell. Telekinesis will let you both move creatures around, friend or foe, and then even restrain an enemy for a round once you've moved them. Finally, don't forget about one of my favorite 5th level spells, Synaptic Static. It does fireball-esque damage in a similar area of effect, but forces an intelligence save instead of dex, and anyone who fails it not only takes full damage, but then for 1 minute has to subtract a d6 from every ability check, concentration check, and attack roll. They do get to make another save after each turn to end the effect, but it's just a really solid damage and debuff spell in a massive area that is just so perfect for what we're trying to do. Imagine hitting enemies with slow and with this. So now they're hardly doing anything, and everything they do is probably going to fail. Yeah, I'm quickening this all day, or at least until I run out of sorcery points, I guess. At level 12, we would be a Sorcerer 10, and that means we get another meta magic option. And yeah, I probably would take Heightened Spell here, assuming that we didn't before, right? Again, it's 3 sorcery points and forces just one target to have disadvantage on their save against a spell you cast. So even if it's an AoE spell, it's not like everybody has disadvantage. I'd love it a lot more if that were the case, or if we could couple it with Quickened Spell, right? But you can't use more than one meta magic option per spell, with a couple of exceptions, meaning that you'd probably only use this if you weren't planning on using your action for Hypnotic Gaze. It wouldn't be terrible to start off the combat with a heightened Uber control spell, giving disadvantage to like the most important enemy that you really want to make sure fails, right? And then start hypnotizing on subsequent rounds. Anyway, it's good to have options. At level 13, we would be a Sorcerer 11, and that means 6th level spells. Now, we no longer get free spells from Clockwork Magic, right, from this point on, but the best one to grab here as a 6th level spell is, of course, Mass Suggestion, to just remove multiple enemies from the battle before it even really begins. Doesn't even require concentration. It is just so strong. Mental Prison, though, is probably at least worth a look. It does decent damage and sort of just like traps an enemy behind perceived danger, restraining them and doing even more damage if they move through the illusion that you've cast. And, I mean, sure, throwing out a bonus action Disintegrate or Chain Lightning once in a while might be fun too. I'd still probably prioritize Mass Suggestion for this character personally, but if you feel confident about your control capabilities already and you want to just up your damage potential, knock yourself out. Time for a level 13 tactics report, and the truth is, not a lot has changed for us tactically since last check. We're still largely throwing out spells with our bonus action thanks to Quicken Spell, and hypnotizing a single enemy with our action, right? But the variety of options available to us now are just so vastly improved with uber powerful control spells like Wall of Force and Mass Suggestion, as well as fantastic damage and debuff options like Synaptic Static. We are absolutely living our best Clockwork controller life here. At level 14, we would be a Sorcerer 12, and that means another ability score increase or feat, and I think I'm probably just continuing to bump either Intelligence or Constitution here, depending on what you took last time. Intelligence for me, taking it to a nice comfy 18 for better hypnotic gazing. At level 15, we would be a Sorcerer 13, and that means 7th level spells. And unfortunately, no, Sorcerers don't get access to Force Cage, alas. But we've still got great options. I think the standout control spell here for us is Reverse Gravity. It forces everyone in a massive area to just fly up into the air or hit the ceiling, and they only get to save against the spell if there's conceivably something they could try to grab a hold of to keep from falling up, right? But even then, they'd be like dangling in midair. So I'm thinking they still wouldn't be all that effective in combat. They'd just avoid taking damage by falling against the ceiling. As good as that is though, I can't help but feel tempted by Draconic Transformation. This spell basically just turns us into a dragon. And as such, we have blind sight, we can fly, but then the best part is, for me, we can use our bonus action to activate our breath weapon every single round, and it deals 6d8 force damage in a massive 60-foot cone. No, it's not exactly controlling your enemies, but, I mean, you still could at least be locking down one target with your Hypnotic Gaze. Nothing says that Hypnotic Gaze won't work if you're transformed into a dragon, and then lets you join in the fun of nuking a bunch of baddies every single round. Sounds like a good time. At level 16, we would be a Sorcerer 14, and as a Clockwork Soul, that means we get Trance of Order. This lets us use our bonus action once per day, or if we spend 5 sorcery points to do so afterwards, to buff ourselves so that for 1 minute, attacks against us can't have advantage, and whenever we make an attack, ability check, or saving throw, we can treat anything rolled lower than a 9 as a 10. Pretty nice for defensive purposes especially. It's kind of like an uber-reliant talent that rogues get, right? Only more limited in how often you can use it. And then finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Sorcerer 15, and that means 8th level spells. And I bet I could count on one hand the number of times I've had a build get to 8th level spells. Dang, multiclassing. So yeah, that's fun. I think the standout control options here are Dominate Monster, so now we could potentially take direct control of any creature. Of course, taking direct and precise control of them with this spell does require us to use our action, so we couldn't be hypnotic gazing at the same time. But we could still issue general commands with dominate spells for the creature to follow without having to spend our action, right? We could just send a mental command like attack that creature or go home to your parents or whatever. Also, the affected creature only gets to make a new save against the spell if they take damage. Very nice. Another one worth considering here, though, I think would be Earthquake. I don't know, it's just so cool and powerful. You cause a massive area of effect earthquake that will potentially knock creatures prone every single round, causes the area to be difficult terrain, and will open up fissures that your enemies could fall into, and your allies as well potentially, so be careful. But then it also will even topple structures and potentially cause damage, knock someone prone that a building falls on, and then just buries them under the rubble. It's just a big, fun, uber powerful spell to play with. Anyway, for our final tactics report here at level 17, just like last time, not a lot has changed for us tactically since last check, but we are the ultimate battlefield controller caster right now. Reversing gravity, becoming a dragon, and causing earth-shattering quakes to harm and shut down our enemies who will fear and tremble at our presence when they're not entranced by our magical guile. So, let's discuss some final thoughts on this build here. No tier score to report on like I typically have with my damage dealing and tanking characters, right? But as always, with our Dungeon Dudes inspired builds, here's the important question to be asking, right? Is this build better than a straight class sorcerer in this case? We never got to 9th level spells, though we still could before we hit the level cap. And some people are going to see that as a pretty big deal. Regardless, from level 5 on, we were delaying our more powerful sorcerer spells by 2 levels, right? But in my opinion, yeah, this is way better than a straight sorcerer. It's definitely unquestionably better than a D ranking, right? And of course, just because we found a build that's an exception doesn't disprove the rule, right? It proves the rule. My goal here isn't to try and claim Kelly and Monty are wrong or anything. I happen to agree with them almost all of the time. And even in this case, yeah, Wizard and Sorcerer don't have a lot of synergy. But this particular build combines them wonderfully. Assuming, anyways, that you're focused primarily on control, which arguably is the most powerful thing that spellcasters in D&D can do. I mean, sure, delaying your stronger spells by a couple of levels is a bummer. But once you hit 3rd level spells, you've got a really solid control option for every single combat encounter. Delaying 4th level spells and beyond is worth the trade-off, I think, if you can unlock the potential to just hard shut down a single enemy, concentration free, until you're ready to deal with them. And coupling that lockdown ability with quickened spell so that you can keep on slinging spells once in a while anyways, at the same time as exerting that powerful control is just perfection. I honestly think that this build is probably my new strongest build ever. And I feel really bad for any DM that would have to deal with this at their table. But I would feel really great for you if you got to play it. So I certainly hope you get to sometime. But regardless, that's the build for the week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you know that I love you guys, because I do. Thank you so much for all that you do for me and for this channel. If you like what you see here and you want to throw some additional support my way, I'd really appreciate it if you would consider joining as a channel member. There's a little button down there, and for just a couple of bucks a month, you not only lend me some great financial support, but can also get access to the library of write-ups that I create for each one of these builds, so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the video or take notes if you wanted to recreate the character yourself. But anyway, I hope you have a really fantastic day and a great week. And if you don't, I hope you hang in there. I believe in you. I hope you'll be kind and that you'll stay safe and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. Well, I wish I was a fisherman tumbling on the sea, far away from dry land and these bitter memories, casting out my sweet line with abandonment and love. No ceiling bearing down on me, except the starry skies above, with light in my hand and you in my arms. Whoa, ho, ho. That song, Fisherman's Blues, is by a folk pop duo. They're called the Water Boys, and I'm actually not that familiar with them, but the movie that I first heard that song in, Waking Ned Devine, and it is like an all-time favorite. If you guys haven't seen this show, you've got to see it. It's just so like wholesome and funny and lovely. It's like so Irish. Anyway, fantastic show. Check it out if you haven't. Waking Ned Devine. You will be happier for having watched it. Where you will attempt to survive a zombie apocalypse. Where you will attempt to survive a zombie apocalypse. Where you will attempt to oh my goodness. That forehead's a little shiny. That's a little better. From our known sorcerer spells. I don't know if that's true. Let's find out. And eat it too. And eat while that doesn't make any sense.